So what you see before you, obviously, is a building, a beautifully burnt down governmental building. The history of this building, as you can see in the logo, it says Soda Sol. And Soda Sol was the concern of a chemical factory kind of assets that represented the seat of Tuzla industry that was then taken over by cantonal government, essentially in the rented or taken. I think it's more taken with some dealing, and the cantonal government seat used to be here. So it was actually first instance of an injury, that something that stood very proudly in the landscape of Tuzla as the symbol of Tuzla's industry was then actually taken over by bureaucrats in the post-war arrangement to continue their looting and to continue their kind of larceny and these kind of post-Dayton, post-peace agreement practices. So this is the first thing that you see. The second thing that you see are these graffiti. And the graffiti that predominate here say stop nationalism, death to nationalism. Other kind of slogans that you could see at that point was "We are hungry in all three languages," right? Nationalists go to prison. One people, one struggle. I can also see that this has beautifully become now the space for some other kind of graffiti art things that are recently added, like the one with Hypnotic in 2019, and you can actually see that this kind of building now stands as a very kind of ambiguous building. They don't know what to do with this. When I say they, I mean the government officials. I mean, there are plans now to start refurbishing it, but since 2014 it has stood kind of as still a shock for the elites here in Tuzla. So why was it a shock? First of all, it was impossible to even imagine by the government officials that something like a popular rising could happen. Before 2014, what you had were types of protests that predominated by people coming in front of power seats, and they demanded that something be done. Whether it's the hunger strikes that used to be here, so Dita workers and other workers of Tuzla industry would actually sleep here and do the hunger strikes before this building, and politicians would just kind of walk past them and continue their everyday life. Or in Sarajevo, when because of staunch idiocy of bureaucrats, they wouldn't issue the personal identification number for babies, so babies actually wouldn't be insured and they couldn't get medical treatment, and they could and so there was usually what you had, like in Sarajevo, tents would be put up, and there was a clear demarcation line between where the power sits and where the disgruntled population are. So never ever before 2014 happened that people crossed over, that actually they imagined and believed that there is no clear demarcation between where power sits and where people are, that actually people are the power. And in that crossing over, politics happened. So all this was taken over. I mean, around estimates and all the way further down. So estimates go that between 10 to 15,000 people roughly were kind of here pulsating, demanding the change to be done.
10%, something like 10% of the population of people.
Yeah, exactly. So everybody was there. The workers of those 6 factories, that were kind of demanding it, that for years were sitting here trying to push for for their salaries to be paid, for their health insurance to be paid, for them to be actually not hungry and to keep their factories operational, because their position was, we can continue to produce. And I'll just paint you a rough picture. So one of the stories of the workers from Dita was that they would work 3 shifts, and that the private owner would bring prostitutes in factory halls. So the factory was turned into a brothel whilst workers were kind of doing the 3rd shift work, and then they would have to clean up and do everything that was demanded of them by the owner. So it's this kind of debasement and this kind of, looking down on workers that they even agreed to put up with just to be able to work and to produce. And all that without being paid. Or pay was completely irregular. Because the ethos was that they were there to work. They were there to produce. The way they related to the factory was as if that was their second home. Right? So there was a very kind of intimate feeling about the factory. So even this building, when they came, before this building, they could see Soda saw this building was built through their work, by their money, right? This was theirs, and then it was taken over. So we have like an injury after injury after injury, and this kind of new reality that dawned on these workers was that everything was exhausted. They were exhausted. All the kind of mechanisms, trade union mechanisms, strike mechanisms, hunger strikes, everything was exhausted. So what was to be done? So when the kind of the pressure grew so hard, and when you had all these thousands of people, the unemployed, the students, the workers, their families, they came here, and the demand was great. So you had actually bureaucrats fleeing the building because they didn't want to even engage with them. The police were standing here, defending the building. And I remember kind of vividly when one policeman was standing there and his mother was, across the barricades, and she said to him, "You'll come home and you will see." And then it was this really tore apart the community, because the police were forced to start using the force against its own people. The unimaginable happened a day before, and that was that the police started beating up people around here. So you had people living in these buildings booing, telling people, "Oh, the police are coming, run!" And so you had a personal navigation system from the buildings, helping the people who were kind of trying to keep the protests together. So the unimaginable thing that happened here was that the war happened in Tuzla again. That was never seen, and there were street fights. Tuzla never experienced street fights of that kind like other cities in Bosnia and Herzegovina did. I mean, this was kind of a relatively kind of enclosed enclave during the war, but street fighting never happened. So street fighting happened on the 6th of February. So on the 7th of February, it was impossible that the kind of the anger would be contained. How was it possible, was our question, that we who survived are then beaten up, that dogs are let on our children? How is it possible? So with this kind of resentment and anger, it was completely impossible to kind of contain. So if you think about it, in that kind of 15,000 people, I mean, that's non-homogeneous group. It is not an organized group. You have various interests being represented. you had, I don't know how many infiltrated agents, how many infiltrated people from various political parties trying to kind of drag the energy apart. And yet the energy prevailed, because the police started marching over there where the yellow building is, and fortunately people had the stones, and they started throwing stones at the police. So that was the first kind of, the bridge over there was the demarcation line, and in some of the photos we made actually postcards, welcome to Tuzla, with these wonderful like burnt out building, or we don't have the sets here, but we'll actually send you some. So because we wanted to show the different face, of course, of Tuzla with the protests and stuff. Not that the city or cantonal authorities loved it. I mean, they hated it, but who cares? So how did it happen that this building got burned down? So 5 days ago I received a phone call from state television, and they said, can you tell us something about paljevina? This is how they refer to it, paljevina, which means the arson. Right, and because I was going live, and I said, oh wonderful, by paljevina do you actually mean people reacting to 25 years of being killed, raped, being kind of robbed of their dignity, being robbed of kind of basic means of survival, factories being gone. If this is what you mean by paljevina, we can talk about the arson, right? But if you just mean by this building burning down, I think this is a very creative process, because, and this is the creative act of violence in a way. What got burned down was a building. Nobody died in this, and people were actually kind of thinking, well, what we are burning down something that's ours. Emina Busolagic, who was the strike leader, right, said, I don't give a shit, it can burn down, I built this was mine, and I have the right to burn it if I want to, right? It's not theirs, so they cannot tell me what to do with something that's mine. And of course, as the building was burning, and we don't even know how it got burned, in 15,000 people, somebody walks in and it starts, and then, it goes up in flames. Because there are a lot of kind of paperwork and stuff, and that's very easy to kind of burn. So as the building was burning down, people started being afraid, and I think it dawned on them that something was going on. Of course, the police was nowhere to be seen. I mean, they were gone. They were completely gone, and the main group headed towards the municipality near Hotel Melain, because they wanted to kind of demand the city authorities to do something, because the cantonal authorities were now done with. They were nowhere to be seen. The government was gone, so there was really this kind of void in governance of Tuzla Canton. Simultaneously, protests were going on in Sarajevo, and of course Sarajevo was the focus of the special police force, because Tuzla was perceived to be peaceful. These workers had been going on for 10, 12 years, sitting here, being hungry, being taken by the ambulance, to hospital, being put on glucose and IV, being patched up, they'll go back to work. So nobody really expected, and that's why it came as a huge shock. So the building was burning, and people started heading towards the municipality, and then we kind of figured out something really had to be done in terms of trying to give meaning to all of this. So the first manifesto of slobode was read out here with the workers. We kind of sat together saying, oh well, this is the text, is this okay, what does this mean, is this okay, does the text reflect really what we want to say? So it was. So we read the manifesto here just there where the grey car is, on behalf of the people. And that's how it started. U ime naroda, right? And of course, the echoes were really anti-fascist echoes. That you are creating the demos out of this multitude. Right? That this, as the building is burning, as the kind of people are still unsure about what this means and how it's going to pan out, fearing what kind of brutality is going to ensue, that you start pressing the tempo yourself. So it's these people have dictated the tempo for decades, 2.5 decades, and workers were always 3-4 steps behind. Now it was for the first time that we were dictating the tempo, and it's a very unusual situation. I mean, it's probably the closest thing that politics comes to timelessness, right? Because you make a move and then things start revolving around you. It is an amazing position, but at the same time, it is very hypnotic. Has it right? It's a very hypnotic. It's very hypnotizing. It's very, because that's when you get to what power really means. That, you know, when you start dictating the tempo, it is like being on drugs, and you have the elation. So there is this element of elation about it that actually, I think, pushed the whole uncertainty around this over the hump, right? And then it could get some sort of shape. So I remember I was walking with Emin that night, so we were kind of going to after the manifesto was read out, so we were walking towards the municipality, and of course the courts were secured. So the workers said, we'll have to protect the courts because all the lawsuits and our legal paperwork are there. But if need be, this can go as well. And what we witnessed was that actually the police crying and, you know, laying down all like the weapons and whatever they had, and they didn't want to kind of participate in this.
Also, Damir, just to add to that, I remember them arguing, the younger police officers with the older ones. The younger ones wanted to start attacking people, and the older ones kept saying, no, we can't do this, stop it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you had the rift in the police force, you really had the rift in the community. So, but it was a very productive rift, right? It was a very productive rift, and the attack started on the municipal building, but it was quickly kind of stopped and the fire was extinguished. And the following day, we went in the evening to think about, so what do we, you know, where do we go from here? So the manifesto that we drafted here, that we kind of finalized, got transported on like near Banja, where you went yesterday. There was a Peace Flame house, and we started thinking about convening the plenum. Right. So plenum had to be convened of all the participants. Of course, not 15,000 people could get there, but at least various groups and fractions could come together to enable the community to reflect on what happened that evening. And I think that's politically, that's another constitutive moment for us, because we started thinking about what to do in the void of the government. So the government, the cantonal government, was okay. Like we don't exist anymore. We've resigned. So the question was, who runs the largest canton? That it's a quarter of a country, the population of, right? So around roughly 1 million people are in Tuzla canton. Like, who runs it? Who signs the everyday things? How do we do this? And I think, you know, there was this kind of quick need to start thinking that you have to do substitute performance. And I think that's problematically for Bosnia and Herzegovina. For decades, foreign donors have been training civil society to carry out substitute performance. So you either have to identify the shortcomings of the state, so you have to kind of say what's not wrong, and then you have to try do something about it, which is one thing, Or the second thing is that you have to start playing the government in the absence of any sort of government, which I think is very wrong. And then the obverse side of it, which nationalists, particularly Dodik, uses beautifully, is that you have to identify how the state is not working. So the nationalists say, well, the state is not working, so we need to dismantle it, right? So you're in a very precarious position, trying to all the while identify something that's not working, and then that being used, and actually doing something about it, and then that being used by the nationalists who want to break the state apart. So it's a very perverse situation, and it's an impossible situation to be put in, and that's why civil society has been kind of maddened by this, and that's why people, particularly now, I think in the last couple of years, there is a qualitative shift that people who've been in civil activism since the war are not sure anymore that they want to do it. So we have a big paradigm shift happening here. So, but to come back to the plenum. So the following day, I remember I put in at around 3 o'clock in the morning, when this was all full of glass and stuff, let's clean our city. This is our city, and we'll clean it. We are taking responsibility for this. Yes, this happened, but we can also clean it. And amazingly, so many people turned up with brooms, with shovels, with stuff, and of course the news reporters came here, everything from, I don't know, BBC, Al Jazeera, local television, you name it. It was an event. So they wanted more violence, they wanted more kind of struggle, they wanted more, and they missed it. So what's going on? You're just cleaning this, what happened? And we were just, we cleaned it beautifully. We were just like having fun. People were having drinks. There was music playing. This was ours, right? And if we can burn it, we can clean it. So, and around this kind of cleaning also emerged discussions, but plenums continued. Plenums continued and started kind of growing more and more. So we first had maybe 70 people, then we had a couple of hundred people, then National Theatre got taken over, and all the while each plenum had a set of demands, what had to be done, right? So we kept identifying as the community what kind of happened and what we want to be sorted out. I think one of the most harrowing things that I lived through the plenum, because I moderated and convened the first one, were the mothers bringing their children to show the marks when the children were beaten up by the police, right? To show this kind of brutality. And it was that kind of kept, and I think it was important for the community to see that, and I think it dawned on the community that the war hadn't ended. It's the continuation of war by other means happened after the signing of the Dayton Peace Agreement, but that this kind of brutality was possible at any time. And I think this is a very disturbing realization for the community who survived the war, that they could still be attacked. And I think this need to kind of protect yourself kept being upheld throughout the plenum. So of course we had problems with security. By the National Theatre, what happened, there were some guns that were planted by the special police, so they would try and find it, and then we would be banned from actually continuing working. I mean, it was various political parties that have deep ties with security kind of offices were trying to drag the energy apart. Counter plenums were started to be all planned to be organized at the university, so we had to respond to that and to try to prevent that. I mean, using various mechanisms. I will tell you the anecdote. So I heard that the counter plenum was to be held at the university, and of course we were trying to find the spot where we could put these hundreds of people, because you can't. So I called the rector of the university, he doesn't respond. Called him twice, he doesn't respond. So what do? I call his wife, who was my philosophy teacher in high school. And because I knew her, I said, "Oh, how are you doing?" She's like, "Oh, I'm doing fine." I said, "Oh, something terrible is happening, our rector is not returning my call, and he's just going to be, he was an ambassador to Russia previously, so, and you can know how well connected he is." I said, "Oh, he's going to have such big problems. I mean, he's just going to, everybody will be talking about him, and if he does this, it'll just be a disaster for him. I mean, people will start spitting on him in the streets." And 3 minutes later, he gives me a ring. So it's really using all these kind of mechanisms to try and think, kind of people savvy. What my grandmother would do, I was thinking, the old partisan would use any sort of mechanism to do. So we prevented the counter plenum from taking place. And as these kind of security concerns grew, we were forced to move at a big cultural center that could sit kind
the
of
building next to the coal miners' monument.
Yeah. They could sit around 2,000 people, and it was chock-a-full. And all the while, you have to understand that there are organizational issues. So we weren't prepared for this, right? If you are trying to kind of convene something that has 2,000 people, I mean, there is logistics, right? So you have to think about the space, you have to think about the sound, you have to start thinking about, fielding the questions. And I think, it's the kind of infrastructurally, we got aware of how politics happen on the basic level of organizing infrastructure. So on the second level, we had to figure out what's on the agenda and how you prepare the agenda. Mainly people later and subsequently had a thing about plenums, and they said plenums were a type of therapy. And of course they were therapy. I mean, when a community comes together to talk about injuries of 25 years, it needs proper politics is therapeutic. Unless politics is therapeutic and transformative, it's not politics, right? And we started actually referring to this building as the symbolic gesture and the reminder of what is possible, right? That the clear demarcation between them and us, them holding the power and us being helpless, being almost put in this infantile position to demand something to be given, is gone. And of course, this takes an enormous responsibility. It's a burden. To be a political being is a burden, because you have to make decisions, right? It's very easy to be in an infantile position and be given things and just shut up, right? That's a very regressive state and, comfortable on one level. But enough people wanted actually to make decisions for themselves, right? And this is how the plenum grew, and this is how even in the years afterwards, we always had this kernel of being able to think of the plenum organization methods and structures. So what happened in the aftermath was that we started deliberating about the interim government or the expert government. Then we realized that we had to replicate 13 ministries that we had to replicate all the work according to these ministries and then push for the expert government to kind of be formed. And it was an impossible task. There weren't that many of us that could do that, right? And we didn't have the know-how. I think we fell into the trap of proper substitute performance. But what it actually showed us is that we don't have the capacity for statecraft. I mean, political movements must have statecraft capability and knowledge, because otherwise you're only satisfying yourself from kind of teasing the power and not wanting to engage, right? If you want to take over, you have to know how to run the damn thing, right? And we didn't, right? We didn't know how to run the damn thing because the madness of the Dayton Peace Agreement meant that it's completely not kind of logical, and we would run it completely differently. But the setup structurally, the setup means that you cannot run the country differently, right? Unless you really change the logic of how things are run, because everything is designed to kind of further corrupt, to kind of further drain the public resources from the people and towards the elites, and not to invest the public funds for the people whose money that is, right? So we reached an impasse, understanding that we have the structural problems that we cannot deal with, that we are not capacity, because for instance, I mean, I would teach, I don't know, Renaissance sonnet, and then I would rush to organize the plenum, right? So I had to do my job at the university, and then I had to do the organizational thing. So, you know, we didn't sleep for months. And but understanding that if we really wanted to take over, and that was a conscious decision, we had to have taken the assembly that was still there. But that and you know, there was a kind of a discussion, but that would have been a coup. And there are only two outcomes of a coup. It's either successful or not, right? So, and we decided that our capacities at that point weren't such that we could carry it over, right? And what kind of repercussions of that, we even kind of thought about that, you know, we weren't ready for that. But this stayed, and actually this building standing now is a testament to still kind of the threat of popular revolt being possible. And if, I mean, this in Sarajevo you wouldn't have had this, right? It would have been glossed over. It's almost like in Terry Gilliam's film Brazil, right? A screen would have been put. Whilst violence is there, you can have your lunch, dinner, and kind of pretend that nothing's happening. In Tuzla, you can't pretend. You can't have this kind of gloss of capital being taken over and to build a hotel or something like that, right? And this is why it, you know, the very fact that this has been kind of still standing like this is a very useful reminder, but to the community about what could happen. So, and I'll shut up here. So let's have questions.
Maybe just shortly, what was the reaction of the city government?
The city government was afraid. I mean, they were afraid, and the mayor was afraid. We met the mayor to actually instruct him to allow us to use the National Theatre. So, and he was very cooperative. He said, everything you need will be at your disposal. Of course, I mean, he started saying, this is fascism, you want to kind of oust legally elected kind of representatives, and we didn't want to engage with that. We just said, let's think about the logistics first. You know, we go into the theatre, and then these discussions will happen later. I think he was very afraid. The city authorities were very, very afraid because, so I mean, coming from nominally calling themselves social democrats, I think they realized that they lost touch with their base, because they got complacent. Social democracy has been going on here and being voted in Tuzla since the 90s. You never had nationalists being voted in the city government. And I think, they got very comfortable thinking, oh well, we'll stay here forever. And this was a reminder that forever has ended.
When Emin and me went to the mayor office to invite him to our opening event, he was at one moment saying, and this fascist attack on the building, and Emin was sitting there.
You should have called me.
What was the reaction of the High Representative and the international community?
That was
About that. So the first media appearance, so he didn't appear up until February the 9th, I think. It was a Sunday, and via link, so he didn't want to go to any news studio or whatever. And the first thing he said in that appearance, I want to assure the Austrian government that none of the Austrian companies, or citizens for that matter, were harmed during the protests. And if push comes to shove, and if violence continues, I will mobilize UFOR to pacify it. And on that very same day, you had the Turkish foreign minister visiting the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, saying, if push comes to shove, the Turkish army is on standby. So you had this little situation of the Ottoman Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire fighting over Bosnia all over again. So it was quite funny, but the thing the High Representative said, none of the Austrian companies were harmed. This was really, for me, defeating.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think everybody tried to pull this apart, because I think it was from kind of internal security forces to kind of these threats of foreign armies coming to I received a phone call on the 12th of February from Vienna, and I could just see it's Austrian number. I said yes, and there was a guy who said this is the headquarters from the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, from Vienna headquarters. This is Ambassador blah blah blah. I'm calling to actually ask you, what do you think about if we appointed a special representative for the crisis in Bosnia? I said, another special representative, right? And they said, well, we understand that the situation is such, but I think really this kind of crisis needs to be. I said, look, this is no crisis. This is an opportunity, right? So we really have an opportunity. And then I started receiving various phone calls. So on a very famous occasion, which Dodik subsequently used to say that plenum members meet in Hotel Tuzla, I was invited to a meeting with Obama's special representative, Hoyt. So Hoyt came and he said, so who are you people? Where did you come from? I said, look, we've been here. I said, where did you come from? So he said, but we don't understand why, how come you emerged? So I said, look, it takes kind of decades of very kind of slow and painstaking work with the community. And I said, look, I don't understand. How is it possible that you completely neglected the economic prosperity and social justice? And when you as the embassy have worked here for rule of law for the past 25 years. So his next question was, what do you want? So, and I said to him, what can you give us? And this is what he said. He said, well, we can't pump in a lot of money in the movement in the first place. I said, okay. I said, we don't need the money for now. I said, what we need is for you to freeze the assets of 81 persons who own $9 billion. Because we have the information that 81 people from Bosnia and Herzegovina collectively own $9 billion, which they earned during the war and after the war. And he looked at me, he said, well, we can't do that. I said, of course you can, because that money couldn't have been taken out of the country without the knowledge of your agencies. Actually, you helped them take that money out and, have these assets. And, and then I left in half. I said, this meeting is over, thank you for coming. So, and tomorrow, there was a newspaper article, Red Al-Qaeda in Tuzla is actually operative, right? And then Dodik said, plenum movement operates from Hotel Tuzla, right? But it was really difficult to resist the attacks of the diplomatic corps, of all the various kind of agencies trying to pull your mind apart and actually trying to break the whole movement apart. But what stayed, and I think is the success, ultimately is the success of all of this, is the Dita factory was defended. It was the only factory that actually was salvaged. And it was a stark reminder, Dita factory during coronavirus started producing disinfectant. We didn't need to import. Like even richer countries than Bosnia couldn't actually, meet the demand for disinfectants. But Dita factory, with its implements being held by Scotch tape. I mean, it's an impossibly amazing factory that people could work in such conditions, but they produced and they kept the production. I mean, yesterday I talked about the amazing kind of slogan that they invented. We are not on strike, we are in protest to maintain production. And they have maintained the production. I mean, they have responded to the community needs, even though they are privatized now, but they have actually put the interest of the factory before their own interests of, that they wanted the factory running at any cost. And it's proven to be kind of, it saved Tuzla and Tuzla Canton during the pandemic. Because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to get all the disinfectant for hospitals, for households, etc., etc.
There's a poster of Dita factory, so if someone wants to see how the...
Why is there?
Well, because Dita put it up there to be reminded. Dita was
2014,
part of the soda store, exactly. Soda store kind of concept. Gustav,